as people look at coaching in inverted commas leaders, I'm
Mm.
not sure what the definition of leaders really is, but within organizations where you have leadership teams and below them functional teams, there is a need to be able to bring them together. And sometimes ego gets in the way, and sometimes lack of communication gets in the way. And having someone working with the team, raising that, bringing it back into awareness is a real positive for organizations.
I think it adds an important dimension to coaching because if coaching is only focused on the individual and their awareness of themselves and their impact on others, they do exist in an environment and other people, other members of the team are that environment.
Yeah.
So if it works for one member of the team, it should work for all members of the team.
I was looking at some research by Professor Boyatsis, which was I think last year, which kind of indicated that the relationship elements are playing a bigger role in the efficacy of coaching. Be it adaptability, empathy, and outcome orientation. And I think that's definitely the case. I really see, in my own model, much more emphasis on silence, listening, and space than oh, I need that model, or I need to do that, or ask this question, or whatever else. And I think from my point of view, as someone who ran an organization or ran organizations, you realize that actually you have a pretty good team and you are pretty clear about what you need to do in the business. So the last thing you need is someone coming in telling you what you should be doing. But the thing you never have is the space to be able to sit down, reflect, the time to sit down and reflect, the place to sit down and reflect. And I always thought, gosh, I wish I had that when I was in the business. And now I'm not. Poacher turned gamekeeper. I'm into, yeah, that's a really good idea. That let's give some space.
What makes reflection particularly effective versus, simply this sort of superficial recounting what's happened?
I think as you use the word simplistic, in a simplistic way, as soon as you reflect on something, you start to try and make sense of it. If you look at the accreditation processes, two requirements from an EMCC point of view, anyway, two requirements would be one, supervision, so that you do have someone to reflect with and who can encourage that reflection. Because as you said, it's not natural and it's not something that everyone can just do. And the second thing is CPD, continued professional development. How do I actually build on that? And how do I recognize what I need in order to help me get better? Reflection.
The idea of tools in coaching, and particularly the use of psychometric tests, that less than 20% of coaches use psychometrics. What's your view about the application of psychometrics in the world of coaching?
Well, when I first got qualified, one of the people in our group said I would never do any coaching unless I had done some form of psychometric assessment beforehand.
Yeah.
And there was uproar.
Yeah.
And she was the only one in a group of, I think, 9, 10 of us. She was the only one. And she was lambasted,
Right.
because this was leading your client down an area that you want to go rather than they want to go. And I have to say that over the years, that stayed with me because it was quite a kind of heated discussion. And I've kind of taken the view that there is a time and a place for psychometric testing, uh, and that it needs to fit with whatever the client is bringing that they need to work on. I think it is valid to say if someone has a need and the psychometric tool helps that, why would you not progress it? Because it gives you more information and potentially more data to work with.
A great comment you made earlier, Stephen, was that people are looking to find meaning in their experience. And I think this is both the value of good psychometrics, and not just good psychometrics, but good psychometrics used well can help provide more information upon trying to identify that meaning. But if I'm working with someone, I want them to do more thinking about who they are and what drives them and why they do things or don't do things, not provide these kind of fairly simple answers that reduce the amount of self-reflection that they need to do.
Yeah.
Maybe I just like prodding people. I don't know.
My first question to you, Lucy, is about therapeutic coaching, because it's not a term that I come across a lot. How would you describe therapeutic coaching, and how does it differ from, let me call it mainstream coaching, or perhaps better still, how does it connect with mainstream coaching?
The term therapeutic coaching can mean different things to different people. What I can do is answer it from my perspective, and from a sort of a growing, the conversations that are happening within the realm that I work within, which is within the worlds of psychotherapy and counselling and coaching, executive coaching, and where those two worlds come together is the space that I'm operating within. As part of my work with the BACP, we're just kind of in the middle of some research into looking to work towards creating a working definition of the term therapeutic coaching from the perspective of dual qualified practitioners who are both psychotherapists or counsellors and coaches who are integrating and combining their practice. From my experience, I've very much been on a journey of integrating my practice over the last 3 years. And part of that journey has been working as part of the coaching division executive committee with the BACP.
There's so many ways of getting through to people and being helpful to people, and not be precious in any case about there's only one way. I think that the broader the church, the coaching community is, the better. And because, rote coaching is problematic. I've never found the same techniques work the same way with anybody. They're always slightly different. And you think that's what makes the job interesting, isn't it? That you don't know where the conversation's going to go. Off it goes, and you think, after 30 years, I haven't thought that would be the case.
Traditionally speaking, in the workplace, coaching has traditionally been something that only the most senior people have got. It will be very highly paid executive coaches, often given to the most senior people within an organization most recently. Before that, actually, it was, performance coaching was seen to actually be something that wasn't quite so good. But more recently, having your own executive coach was, kind of something to be very, very proud of, and, but quite elitist and quite rare. On the other side of things, if you were to be somebody who was having counselling or psychotherapy, that would probably be because you've got to the point where things have become completely unmanageable. Either you couldn't work, or you were you're having a breakdown in your relationship. You got to the point of crisis, and then either your GP had referred you on to something through the NHS, or that if you were lucky enough, you would then have been able to access some private psychotherapy. I think that really important opportunity that there is now for us as practitioners, and also the world of work and beyond, is recognizing that actually there's a whole place in the middle of the spectrum whereby you can get some really great help that is going to make a big difference to you. And you don't have to be super thriving and wanting to get the next promotion. You don't have to be really, really struggling at the end of your tether. You can be that guy in the pub that you described, Doug, who's actually not feeling quite right, wanting to talk about it, and then needing to find the right person who's going to be able to help them work through their problems, help them understand why they're finding something particularly difficult before they get to that point of crisis. And that for me is this sort of interesting space in the middle that hopefully the evolution of coaching will be able to fill in the right way. My experience of being a member of the BACP, which for around 8 years now since I began my transition into this world, is from a member perspective, and particularly as the coaching division, we're an incredibly passionate community of people who are all learning from each other. And what's fantastic about it is it brings together people, you know, to both of your points that you've made, we're all still learning. And the wonderful thing about what we do is that we're probably never going to stop learning, because the world's going to keep changing, for one thing. So we're going to need to keep adapting. And then we're going to keep understanding as we then evolve as humans in response to the evolving world. So it's an ongoing journey. And we as a community of practitioners, we're coming together, we're constantly talking, we're constantly working with each other to understand the work that we do. And most importantly then, why it's important, how is it going to benefit people, who is it going to benefit? And to Peter's point earlier, we understand that the work that we do is not going to be for everybody. It will be for particular people and particular circumstances that will be particularly beneficial for.
I would say that my podcast endeavor is a little bit of a selfish thing, in as much as I started it for myself first and foremost. That sounds absolutely terrible, I know, but by that I mean as a learning mechanism for me to dive back predominantly into academia, because I've mostly interviewed academics rather than practitioners, and mostly interviewed academics rather than coaches, although I have interviewed consultants and I have interviewed coaches. How brilliant this research is, and how frustrating it can be that so much of this great stuff doesn't see the light of day. I am just every single week getting to talk to academics in the world of sports psychology, just constantly surprised, delighted, and amazed how much great content is out there, and I'm just constantly striving to bring that alive and to make it as accessible for as many people as possible. I think that, you know, the memes that you see on social media, and you know, you can control your attitude, effort, and energy, and it's all about, you know, the grind and stuff like that. And obviously, there's so much
that take no talent. You know,
yeah, things. Yeah, I mean, I post about that one all the time, which, you know, I go back and forward with that in terms of his, you know, the thing you're referring to there is a poster that says 10 things that need no talent, and it's body language and turning up on time and all that jazz. And, you know, on the one hand, you can dive into the science of personality and the personality literature and go, okay, talent is an interesting word here, but there's definitely a biopsychosocial quality to these aspects that feel a little bit out of your control and might be biologically informed or genetically informed. At the same time, you know, the research out there on belief about belief and you know, aspects of personality psychology that demonstrate, you know, how you perceive the world is gonna influence how you act in the world. And so actually, if you do believe that these things take no talent, maybe that's useful for you. So my kind of brain goes back and forth on that one. We can have a further conversation about that if you want, but there is a lot of pseudo intellectual stuff, pseudo psychological stuff, and pop psychological stuff. I've always been really mindful of still trying to be evidence informed and not too outlandish with my writing. At the same time, I love to sit down and write about stuff that inspires me and gets me excited. And that's how I've always seen it. I imagine athletes on the team bus reading the book, and I want them to be engrossed in the book. How can I help footballers understand self-regulation in a kind of a nimble, dynamic, quick, fun manner? I do think you have to accept that you're going to abuse a couple of things for the point of bringing it alive, because ultimately you want players to be able to take these and run with them.
In terms of sort of meeting people where they're at, I'd love to get any of your reflections on this, Dan. So, when I started working in sport and first work with any like elite athletes, what I found really challenging, I've got better at it, but I still think it's one of the harder things, is when you meet someone, I think this is true in all domains, who's being exceptionally successful in what they're doing, they might be a little bit more reluctant to sort of thinking, well, am I going to undo stuff? So here's the thing, you used to always hear this in football. Like, talented player does something stupid, gets sent off. Pundits go, you can't take that out of them. You know, so people kind of, I think, build up this idea that if I start picking at any of my psyche, I'm going to unravel with something. So you've worked with a ton of people who have been extremely successful in what they're doing, and you're kind of going in there and going, let's see if we can make them more successful.
So I think the way I'm trying to answer this, what I'm trying to say is, again, you're reaching out for the language tools in your frameworks. You know, I use scaling a lot, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you're as confident as you can be, 1 being you're as far away from as confident as you can be. Where are you now? Even if somebody who's really confident will say 7 or 8. Ah, brilliant. Well, what would 9 look like? How, you know, and then you start talking about the steps to get to 9. I can just identify in the midst of a session a moment when I can use a scaling tool or a counter or a strength or the miracle question from Solution Focus, or express empathy in that moment, or ask an open question there, or listening closely here, or draw on a mental skill, or something like that. You recognize the patterns, and then when you do that, you're able to influence even the best players, because you realize, I don't need to have played this game. I don't need to have the knowledge you've got. And if anything, it's a superpower in the room. That's what I use when I walk into a room full of top coaches or players. It's like, hey, you guys have forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. That's not what I'm here for. But what I'm able to do, and take this the right way, but within conversation, I'm able to out-intellectualize somebody who has an enormous knowledge of their sport, but doesn't have the breadth of tools that I do in order to broaden and deepen conversation.
What can you learn? And I think the learning goes both ways. But what can you learn from a sports domain that can be applied in other domains, in business and health and education and stuff like that?
You can look at all these world champions, gold medalists, and there's nothing you can learn from them because they're simply exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
Who's arguing that? I find that interesting that there's a debate on LinkedIn related to that. I don't think it's I don't think it's an either or. I think it's and also. You know, there are these Olympians, if you like, if we're going to debate about Olympians, you know, they're in a high performance environment. There's not one single one now who's not, you know, immersed in a high performance environment, who's not being exposed to high performance tools from a physical, technical, tactical, mental standpoint, meshed together, who, you know, if we're talking about team Olympic sports, isn't exposed to you know, cutting edge leadership processes and teamwork, and, you know, great coaching science. By and large, you know, it's all pretty well done out there now, and the growth in the development and the learning of these players is very, very dependent and influenced on those high performance environments and high performance people around them. So, you know, for somebody to say, oh, well, they've got to where they've got to on the podium because, you know, they just have skill in their feet or in their hands, is utter nonsense. So I know which side I would be on that one. I think it's and also, not either or.
I wonder if there's an issue about the word coach, because I wonder whether coaching in business is different to coaching in sport.
You think back to the greatest coaches, sports coaches of all time, often they're the ones talking about transformational coaching rather than you know, anything else. It's about relationships. I think this is inbuilt into sports coaching. And it's interesting what you're saying, that the world of business coaching, which I'm not a huge expert on, they do feel a little bit more process oriented, and I've always wondered if that's just the pragmatic nature of, people have got to dish out money for a coach, and so it restricts the possibility to build a relationship. But the vast majority of people out there would say, as a sports coach, you really need to know a lot about sports you're coaching. If you're a golf coach, know about golf. I would imagine you could walk into banking, and you could walk into law, and you could walk into accounting, and nobody really asks you to have a deep knowledge of those areas. You know what? Let's actually break this up, and let's put the technical, tactical, and physical in 3 boxes. But underneath those boxes is this big box of biopsychosocial, because nobody denies in every single sport, technical exists, tactical exists, physical exists. You could even say in a more sedentary sport like darts, there's technical, there's tactical, there's physical, right? How physical they were in the 1980s with Eric Bristow and Jockey Wilson, I don't know, but lifting. They still had to stand up and throw the dart. There's a physical element to it, but every sport has these 3 components. What I'm coming along and saying is biopsychosocial exists every single second. It is omnipresent, and it is constantly pressuring and influencing technical, tactical, physical.
Well, Gordon, you've got a really interesting sort of career path. You've worked in an area that is growing in interest, I would say, and that's the world of the first responder. We talk there about police, fire services, ambulance, and so on.
There's some common features of the things that become stressors in those first responder type environments, and maybe not just even in the response world, but there's that part of all of those services which isn't response, but are still high stressor type working environments. On the one hand, role clarity. I think, people knowing exactly what their role is and what's expected of them, I think is one source. I think one of the other sources is the level of support that are around the people who are, if you like, the frontline first response people. But again, there's also that physical environment of potentially being assaulted. And again, that's not unique to policing. I think, social workers, healthcare workers, fire service, all probably, and ambulance staff all experience those things as well.
It's a great point you raised, Gordon, but I was interested how early it came in notifying it as a stressor, that sense of having responsibility for others. You can see those times, obviously we talk about mental toughness and the buffering effect. And I think that illustrates quite well where that buffer exists. Like almost like if you only have sufficient resource to be able to handle your own stresses during the day, and someone else comes to you, you just think, oh, not now, can't handle this. And so what kind of training would those young people moving into supervisory positions get in order to, it's not just about the supervising, is it? It's how do we actually help you to use less of your own resource dealing with, your own stuff?
When you look at the statistics, a third of them have got less than 5 years experience. The support that's given to people in terms of moving into supervisory positions varies force by force, to be honest. Some of the better forces actually do a training programs to try to prepare people into those roles. Some people are promoted into them and may get no training at all. Again, not an unusual thing. I think the statistic I read recently about first line supervisors, there's approximately 80% of people who go into first line supervisory roles, not just in policing, but generally, that never have any training.
So, I guess what I'm trying to explore is, as you progress up an organisation, the stressors and the pressures are not only greater, but they're different. And so not everybody can adjust.
A sense of a responsibility to do the right thing by the public, but they also feel often quite hurt when things don't go well, or when there's what they see as unjustified criticism. And I think that's reasonable. And those are all pressures that they're trying to process and deal with, while also trying to do quite a demanding job. One of the things you touched on there is that idea of self-efficacy combined with experience, combined with the ability to reflect and make sense. And I was going to ask, have you seen that in other sort of industry sectors and other areas of work?
You essentially learn about yourself. You then use that added learning to aid your reflection on the experiences you have, which will help you to then hopefully deal with future experiences in a slightly better way, then reflect again. But it's always getting that relative to understanding yourself.
I think from what you're saying there, John, it makes me just think about that idea of, if we want people to be self-reflective and own a level of not being sure sometimes, that sort of the way in which that might cause a bit of cognitive dissonance with identity of what they think they should be like, or what they think they should be portraying, I think is quite an interesting area of risk, really, because it's an interpersonal risk to be able to say, well, actually, I'm not sure, and on reflection, this is how I might view that situation. And that might then be seen as weakness as opposed to actually strength. And it's almost that area of vulnerability, the area of owning sort of a level of mental sensitivity sometimes, to be able to say, actually, in a reflective sort of context, I might react in these ways. I've got an interest in at the moment about belongingness, and the way I think belongingness might be a key mechanism for a whole series of other things. So it's quite a narrow sort of idea, but I think it's actually a mechanism that in fact affects a lot of other things like psychological safety, for instance, where I think one of our natural human tendencies is to want to belong to something, and it becomes a fundamental part of our identity, and therefore trying to be part of a team is a really great thing. And then when we're in a healthy environment and a healthy team, and where we are psychologically safe and where we can express ourselves properly, that's optimum. It's lovely, it's great. But actually not everywhere's like that.
Employers want graduates with three main skills: communication, agility, and adaptability. And all of these is part of resilience. So they want graduates that are more resilient when they graduate and they go out there and work. We wanted to help our students to be more resilient, to be more flexible, and to be more adaptable. But where to start from? This is the mental agility program. So helping students to be the best version of themselves through the mental toughness framework and the MTQ Plus questionnaire, to find where their weaknesses lie, if they've got any weaknesses, or where the point of strengths are, and apply these to the workplace once they graduate. We can talk about the benefits, like endlessly, but I feel like the benefit is exactly this: empowering people, empowering young professionals, into understanding, at least in higher education. Then the application of this concept goes at all levels, senior management. I know you, Peter, have applied this to senior management and whatever, but at least higher educational level, helping students to really, really understand who they are, what they stand for, how they can develop. What's really helping us to keep this project alive and developing it and running it in the next terms is the impact it's making on our students.
One particularly interesting group was when I had the opportunity to do it with the International Masters Programme for Managers, which is a very unusual program because it is, as the name says, it's international. So it involves students based in Montreal, Yokohama, Rio de Janeiro, Bangalore. So it's very international. but they're all senior managers and they're all involved in big organizations. This is the opposite end of the scale, really, to the group that Alessia has been working on. These are managers who've been there, done it all, and now what they're doing is sort of stepping back and thinking about how to go to the next level. So this is what's really interesting about it. It's as relevant and helpful for those people, judging by what they've said about it, as it is to these younger students. And I think that's really exciting.
You've been around enough years to have seen a lot of cohorts of students. Do they almost need mental toughness now more than they have done in the past?
I think all of the cohorts of students over the years that I've worked with would have benefited from the kind of insights that you can gain from this.